Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's SANS webcast, Certified Cyber Personnel Who Protect the Electric Grid. My name is Carol Oss of the SANS Institute, and I will be moderating today's webcast. Today's featured speaker is Tim Conway, Technical Director, ICS and SCADA Programs at SANS. If during the webcast you have any questions for our presenters, please enter them into the questions window located on the GoToWebinar interface at any time. Please note that this webcast is being recorded, and a copy of the slides and recording of this webcast will be available for viewing later today and can be found on the SANS registration page. And with that, I'd like to hand the webcast over to Tim.
Thank you, Carol. Welcome to everybody on the phone out there in internet world. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on what part of the country you're in. And I see a whole bunch of names of people that recognize and have worked with for a very long time in the attendee list. So anticipating some excellent questions. We definitely have some time at the end for questions, but we have other members of our team that are online monitoring the questions as well, and they can likely respond to your questions throughout the webcast. With that, we'll begin by covering through some of the items we're going to address in the agenda here. First, there's a lot of questions that come up when we're teaching our the ICS 456 course in regards to the certification, the why, the what, the who, and the how type questions in regards to this certification specifically and where it fits in the industry. We'll walk through kind of the do we really need another certification element, what kind of information is covered in the certification, whether this is more for somebody on a compliance team or on a cybersecurity kind of practitioner or implementer side, and how is the cert developed, what kind of background, what kind of information is involved, and where can you pursue more info. We'll begin with the why. So we're going to start with why did we create a GIAC critical infrastructure protection certification. So number one, because we like having power as individuals, as a community, as country. You know, the goal of all the utilities across the globe is to provide safe, reliable, affordable power. Every country kind of understands the role of the electric sector within their own nation's economy, within their own defense capability, within their own security. Every single one of the utilities that is focused on this, focused on these objectives, definitely a culture of mission-focused operating individuals, understands the impact that failure to perform their job adequately could impact their neighbors, their family, their friends, and ultimately every employee is also a customer. So they ultimately understand that it could impact themselves directly as well. So looking to, you know, this electric system that within North America and others abroad has operated and existed for over 100 years. And it's over time been a very diverse system and is modified and grown from an operational perspective and changed. And throughout my own career, I've discovered when there's a problem, when there's an issue, generally I could look to operations and they would have already dealt with something like it or faced it themselves directly. So in these examples and kind of a little brief history that I'm going to walk through, I'm going to talk through some of the training requirements, certification requirements, and some of the things that the electric sector has already embraced and well understood. So in the early days, from an operating environment, when it comes to workforce challenges or technology explosion within an operating environment or a control center, a dynamic electric system in regards to it's changing over time and how we generate, transmit, balance load, how we perform those operational actions, the introductions of energy markets. And we look to the increasing and high levels of regulation that have occurred over time. I look to operations and I look to see what path did they forge in regards to seeing these challenges that we're seeing in the cyber side and in the security side and the operational and reliability elements. And I ask, what path did they forge as they went down this road? And in the early days, as I worked in the control center environments, I saw in the 80s, the 90s, what I'll call the early days, not necessarily the early days of the electric system, but the early days of identifying that there was change needed in the certification and training path for electric system operators. The early days, generally speaking, someone working at a control center generally came from an operating environment in the field, coming from a power generation facility, somebody coming from a transmission substation, or line crew work or transmission line department, being identified by control center operations and being moved up and coming into that control center environment. And usually it was somebody who had worked with somebody in the past, and it was somebody who knew someone within the organization and had a feeling that they would be successful in that role. As those individuals came in, they sat, they listened, they learned, they tried to understand how the electric system was operated from a generation system supervisor perspective or a transmission supervisor perspective, or maybe they were in a planning role or a contingency analysis role where they were looking at day ahead tasks or after the fact tasks, or if they truly were in a real-time operator role. They would spend months listening, learning the language, understanding the systems, working as a shadow operator across many shifts for months and months and months until ultimately a review team would say the individual is ready to sit a solo shift and begin operating the system. As that approach continued on, it worked for a good period of time, relying completely on the job training in that manner. As we continued to add complexity to the electric system and continued to add complexity into electric system operations, many started to identify that change was needed. This image that's on the screen here, I had the opportunity to work with and do some joint training and presentation with Rocky Feast from SOS International, who does a considerable amount of training of NERC certified operators across the North American electric system and other countries as well. But this graphic says a lot, and I could see it from the years I've spent in control center, and I've seen how this became more and more complex as we looked at an individual in the center and we looked at the individual job tasks that they performed that were required in real-time operations, normal operations, emergency operations, all in performance of the job that they were ultimately responsible for and within the department that they operated in, whether it was transmission or generation or planning. As we looked to that, we looked at the structure that we put around them, the procedures that were in front of them, the policies that were governing those procedures, and the governance of the organization, assigning importance and relevance and structure around those policies and procedures. We looked to the form of how we designed their workstations. How easy could they get to information? How quickly could they identify information that was of interest? The floor plans, the layouts, the environmental design, driving towards the usability and the ability for them to collaborate and communicate with their peers within the organization and outside of the organization for peer utilities and neighboring entities. That environment over time has become more and more and more complex for those that are involved in control center operations. You've seen it. You've seen the complex electric system. You've seen the multiple operator tools, tons of displays in front of them, alarms and alert screens, bells ringing, different things flashing in their face. It's like the casino floor in Vegas. The complexity elements as well is the operator sits in a building. They sit in a facility that is distant from the environment that's under control. They're distant from the substations. They're distant from the power generation assets that they're controlling. They're distant from all of their interties and interconnections. So they have to trust the tools and technology that are surrounding them at their desk in order to make rapid decisions. And they have to have a very diverse set of skills so that they can understand what their peers are doing. If it's a generation system operator, understanding what their transmission operators are doing, understanding what the generation control rooms are doing, understanding what the line workers are doing, understanding what their neighboring utilities and the markets are doing, and ultimately the reliability coordinators. So this diverse skill set is required, and the ability to constantly work in coordination with others. It is definitely not a single person sport. However, there is absolute ultimate responsibility for that individual to take the appropriate actions that are within their job tasks and department. Looking at this, operators going through this program, watching a number of operators coming through retirement, watching newer employees coming into these field environments, and starting to see some workforce constraints coming forward as they needed more staff in the control centers as that complexity grew, and they saw less of a pipeline to deliver those individuals. So this NERC certified system operator path had a series of significant steps, and it was eventually developed from the dedicated work of a lot of people. And you can say this across many NERC standards, many NERC guidelines, and the NERC CIP set of standards is no different, going all the way back to the urgent action request of some very concerned individuals working for the utilities that saw cyber threats and the potential to impact the mission of delivering reliable power as the driving force behind why we needed critical infrastructure protection standards. Here in the training side in 1994, the System Operator Training Subcommittee identified a need for some level of certification for people that were sitting at these desks that had ultimate control of the electric system. Moving many years ahead, action plans were created and developed that the utilities voluntarily agreed to pursue. 1998, we started seeing some of the early training classes for NERC certified operators, and an initial exam was created later on that year to test and qualify operators before they were allowed to sit at a desk. So at that point, most utilities started moving away from the traditional path of on-the-job training, board review, and a determination of whether somebody was ready to sit that desk, and they started adding on these elements of an exam and a credential that was required in order for somebody to fulfill a role. In 2000, there was a discussion around once somebody is certified, there should probably be some ongoing continuing education requirements because this job is constantly changing, new tools, new technology, new deregulation, new markets, new standards coming in. It's a very dynamic role, a very dynamic job environment. There should be some element of continuing education. A white paper was eventually created in 2004 on a continuing education program, and ultimately the regulation came in 2005 with PER 003, requiring people in certain roles with the ability to operate or impact the electric system being required to maintain a NERC certified system operator credential and a certain number of continuing education hours moving forward. So looking to what operations has done in many cases has often informed what the cyber operators that are now looking at very similar challenges, very similar needs, should be considering and looking towards in the future. So with that, I'm going to move to the what component in regard to what we have done. So just like in the past, the definition of something needs to change, the creation of a training class, the creation of a certification, the creation of a credential, and ultimately the need for utilities to pursue it for the people that are in these very specific roles. So first, we'll talk about the NERC operator, just looking at a couple of different examples here and why we believe this was needed and why some action is required. So from a NERC operator perspective, currently, they must maintain, first, they have to have the appropriate system operator certification in order to sit a specific job task and perform certain roles. If they do not have that certification, they cannot sit in that job task and perform those roles. After obtaining the appropriate credential, they must maintain 200 hours of continuing education across 3 years. So within that 3-year period, 200 hours must be completed every 3 years. And those 200 hours are comprised of a number of different required elements, including emergency operations and some simulations-based hours. So very specific training elements and very specific training components so they know how to respond under certain system conditions. So this is a solid program in regards to the same electric system that these operators are operating. We have teams of cyber operators that are hands-on and have the ability to impact that same system. So this would be the mark to look to in regards to what we should be targeting in order to achieve it. There were a number of other effects to look at here is when the requirement came in for certified operators, it changed the model of how you went out and did hiring, how you went out and performed recruiting, the type of individuals and the type of skill sets that you were looking for, because you knew ultimately they needed to have the capability to achieve this certification and the interest and willingness to maintain and manage that certification moving forward. Organizations also understood that in order for operators to meet this demand, they would have to develop training departments and have the ability to train their operators on the required continuing education, and they'd have to put it in their job schedules so that they just couldn't come in and constantly be on shift operating the electric system. They would need dedicated training weeks and dedicated office weeks so that they could prepare and understand the changing standards and changing guidelines and changing procedures and policies that have impacted their job. So we can look to this and say this is ultimately where we would like to be, and assess that to where we are currently. Looking at another industry just from a comparison perspective, I'll talk about an industry that we all at some point in our lives and likely still interact with is your local barber or your local salon. And in those environments, in order for somebody to cut your hair, they need to maintain a license. They need to have a license to do so. They had to have been through many, many hours of training, hours of development, and depending on the state, many states actually require them to have continuing education hours. The kind of average is about 14 hours every couple of years that they need to manage and maintain some level of currency. So in these two examples, you have an extreme far end because of the impact of critical infrastructure. You have operators that have hundreds of hours that they must manage and maintain across a variety of different knowledge topics over a 3-year period, specific to capability on emergency operations. You have another industry that has licensing, credentialing, and continuing education hours. While some may define their appearance as critical infrastructure, it likely isn't. However, there's still a need for some level of assurance that you're trusting someone to do a task, and there should be some level of credential, some level of continuing education that that person must perform. And for us, the issue is this, that we take operators and we surround them in an entire environment and control center with tools and technology that they rely upon to do every aspect of their job, from voice communications to radio communications to utilizing an energy management system to see and have situational awareness of the electric system, and to be able to control and direct that electric system in a way that they can perform the job that they're required to do, which is ultimately ensure the reliability of the electric system. We surround them with those tools and technologies, and then we provide an army of people to support those from a networking perspective, from a system administration, server management, a workstation management, communications engineers, supporting the infrastructure that communicates out to the field environments, whether it's a generation control center or a substation environment, the distribution automation side, the metering, the billing, all of that technology tying back together with a significant number of people that have access to support, manage, maintain, and defend those individual components. But we do not have any requirements for credentialing or for ongoing education for those individuals from a state or a federal level. Each individual company may have very specific programs where they have determined and they've come to the realization that this doesn't make sense, and that they will require people in certain roles to have certain levels of training. And at a company level, they will require specific credentials for a job role. Or at a company level, they will require continuing education, or they'll support it in individuals' personnel or training development programs as they work through kind of their year's goals. But those company level decisions can come and go based on leadership, can change over time, can be influenced by cultures as mergers and acquisitions occur, can be modified directly. And in a number of cases, if you were requiring a specific credential or capability, you may find difficulty and challenges in finding individuals that actually possess that skill set or capability. And you would definitely have to work towards building that individual and training them in a way that matters and meets your need and meets your demands. As we look to those individuals, we say we need unicorns in many cases. We need people that are difficult to find. Some believe they don't exist. Some believe they have to be built. And for those that don't like being referred to as a unicorn, perhaps you're a more manly Yeti. In either case, you are a difficult individual to find. Finding somebody that has a mix of information technology and operational technology and industrial control systems, understanding how those work together and interoperate in an operational environment, looking at the understanding and the impacts from a cybersecurity perspective on how those systems or those different components can be influenced or manipulated or misused, and then layering on top of that the regulation and the compliance requirements that provide certain requirements in regards to how you perform your job or how you demonstrate that you performed a task. Looking to the compliance engineers, that you can obtain somebody from a skill set that understands very well, coming from a Sarbanes-Oxley or from a HIPAA environment or from a financial audits perspective. They understand audit process and they understand documentation and demonstration of evidence, but they may not understand the IT components, the technology components of how something or a system is going to be implemented or architected to support the requirements. They may not understand an industrial control system environment. They may not understand operating environments or the electric system. And trying to find these unicorns and Yetis becomes very challenging for many companies. And truly the only path they have is a very tactical path of finding an individual and stealing them from another organization because they're very, very in high demand and short supply. What we need to move to is making these individuals. So making a Yeti-corn, for example, a combination of those with these variety of skill sets, with a mix of information technology, operations technology, with a mix of cybersecurity and operations, and an understanding of the compliance requirements. Or from a compliance-focused individual, a compliance knowledgeable, compliance experience, regulatory understanding, and an exposure and an understanding on how to implement those across these different domains. These are the types of people we are looking to build. These are the types of people we're looking to create. So we've reached this point that operations reached when they looked at their very complex control center environment. And they said, what kinds of people are going to be successful in this role? And they changed from the types of people they were bringing up through the organization, people that may have worked in a power generation environment or a substation environment or on a transmission line department, but perhaps they were not very computer capable. Maybe they didn't understand how the automation elements work or how SCADA control functioned. They understood the physical components. Maybe they weren't going to be a good fit in a large-scale control center environment. Or maybe having a mix and a diverse skill set of somebody who was very computer capable and cyber capable, and maybe worked in a communications engineer role, plus somebody who was from a power gen or substation environment working together through their development, through their training, so they could learn from each other. Moving towards this model where you're pairing people together and sticking pieces of the puzzle together that they could train together and work together and learn from each other. This is the focus that we look towards with ICS 456, from a 5-day course that we've created that really tries to target how we build more and more of these types of individuals that electric utilities need within North America and abroad. This 5-day course, absolutely designed, along the SANS promise that you are going to be able to go back to work on Monday and do something with what you've learned in this course. We are absolutely focused on sending each student back to work on Monday with new capabilities specific to their job role and specific to defending the electric system and ensuring reliability. Each student definitely will learn specific technical implementation strategies as well as compliance approaches designed to balance operations, cybersecurity, and regulatory demands. There was a time where many could say, in SIP versions 1, 2, and 3, when utilities were defining their own risk-based assessment methodology, they could define it in a way and work through the process, a very documented, well-driven process, and they could ultimately come to a conclusion that they did not have any critical cyber assets. And in that model, they could be 100% compliant, but all of the work that they've done is in paper and spreadsheets. And so you would, at that time frame and kind of that early SIP paradigm, you had a number of cybersecurity professionals and a number of people, kind of political leaders saying these standards were documentation only. They were regulatory, they were compliance focused. They weren't actually making a difference from a cybersecurity or reliability element. That was a difficult comment to defend or state because it was so unique to each company. In versions 1, 2, and 3 of the early paradigm, there were a number of companies that absolutely identified through their own risk-based assessment methodology that they did in fact own and operate critical assets. And they did in fact have associated critical cyber assets that they had to do a considerable amount of investment and re-architecture and modifications to support. So it wasn't a unique kind of one for all that back then you had some mixes of some entities depending on an approach. They were definitely compliance focused with very little cybersecurity or operational benefit. You had others that were very much focused on cybersecurity and reliability, but they weren't doing a very good job of documenting and demonstrating it. So in those areas, you had a strong focus on cybersecurity, but little capability to actually demonstrate and defend that in an audit. As we move towards the new paradigm, you absolutely have this attachment one criteria-based model where individuals are reading through that and they're identifying the assets that they own and operate and what their impact is on the electric system. Gone are the days of a risk-based assessment methodology. Now we have bright line criteria, very focused on this is what, if you own an asset like this and it matches this criteria, it will be ranked in this way. You can always go above and beyond it, but based on this criteria, you will at least perform the following. And working through all of those requirements that apply based on the assets that you own and operate. Significant paradigm shift, significant difference from the SIP versions 1, 2, and 3 days. So as we move into the version 5 and we move into the version 6, depending on which standard you're in, and we prepare ourselves for the version 7 standards that may be coming very soon in regards to SIP 003, we look at a number of utilities that are being exposed to SIP for the first time ever. And they're starting from this higher level. For the utilities that had identified a number of assets under SIP versions 1, version 2, and version 3, they're expanding their program and moving forward. For those that were never exposed to SIP in the past, they're having to start at a full sprint and achieve a great number of tasks very rapidly. So they have an even greater demand from a workforce perspective, an even greater demand for rapid education, rapid deployment, rapid capability to be able to identify and hire the right individuals and bring them on board and start building a SIP program that is solid and mature and capable. We are absolutely focused on building those people. As we look to other elements within the course, definite heavy exposure to technical tools, system hardening approaches, network architectures, attack case studies, incident response, regulatory process, helping in every way we can to build unicorns. This last element is really what SANS is known for. All of the cyber in-depth hands-on labs and layering in all of our knowledge from decades of working in the electric utility space and working with SIP directly, building this puzzle piece of all these different skill sets and trying to move people down a path where they're exposed to what their peers are doing. They understand from a system engineer what their network engineers are doing. They understand why their compliance engineers are asking for very specific documentation and evidence in very specific ways, exposing auditors to what entities are facing, exposing regulatory bodies to how these standards are being implemented and being interpreted. In every way possible, trying to educate everybody on what their peers and other people throughout this sector are doing in their community, as well as expanding their own capabilities for their own job roles so they can go back and make a difference as soon as they return to work. Many who've been through a SANS class, they've generally heard the term the fire hose, and that is an indication of, in a 5-day class, especially at a 400 level course, we are trying to cover a wide array of topics. For example, if we were to make a 500 level course for NERC-CIP, we would absolutely focus it more on the technical only. So if we were to build a 580 course, definitely would focus on CIP 005, CIP 7, CIP 10, and implementing those very specific standards, depending on which environment you're in, whether it's generation, transmission, control center, what type of role you are as an entity. For this course, being the 400 level course, we are covering all of the domains that are NERC-CIP. So as more CIP standards are approved, as more CIP standards go into effect, we are adding hours to each day, moving more into a boot camp style so that somebody can still come Monday through Friday and be exposed to it all. So in the current layout, we don't teach the standards in order. We group the standards in a way that makes sense to us and our students. So in kind of the first day, we provide a little bit of history in regards to who NERC is, why they exist, where they get their authorities, moving through the standards, moving through the functional model, moving through the glossary of terms and definitions, and ultimately getting into CIP 2 as a scoping standard and CIP 3 as a governance and security management controls standard. We group the access control and monitoring standards together in day 2 on CIP 005, electronic security perimeters, so access control on the electronic side, and CIP 006, access control on the physical side. We also layer in CIP 14 to talk about the difference between physical security of the cyber asset in CIP 006 and physical security of the facility in CIP 14. And we also show the relationships between those in regards to asset selection and site selection. Moving into day 3, we cover CIP 7 and CIP 10, these system management days. So the general ports and services, antivirus, patching, user accounts, event logging under CIP 7, and moving into CIP 10, change management and vulnerability assessments within that environment across all of the individual systems and assets. Day 4, we cover kind of 4 standards all together. CIP 004, personnel training, background checks, access control, or access reviews and revocation. Moving into CIP 11 in regards to information protection, data sanitization. So those 2 at the first half of the day is CIP 4 and CIP 11, focused on things that you would be doing in an effort to prevent some level of an incident, prevent some level of information leakage, some level of open reconnaissance available to adversaries. So focusing on that in the CIP 4 and CIP 11 elements. Then we move into the last 2 standards, the CIP 8 and CIP 9 standards, where we focus on a response from an event. So identifying that an event occurred, how you'd respond to it, who you'd notify, who you'd report to, working with the EISAC, information sharing and analysis center, and getting information out to your peer groups so that if it was a coordinated attack across many entities, people would get relevant information, actionable information as fast as possible. Ultimately moving into CIP 009 on the recovery and restoration elements and piecing your system back together. We close the 5-day moving down the path of the CIP process. So standards development, request for interpretation, audit process, compliance monitoring and enforcement programs, looking to the CIP of the future, so standards that are in development now across the different standards drafting teams, and looking at how those may impact your current programs today. We cover all of that in a 5-day format, and we will continue to cover it in a 5-day format as we add a CIP 13 element that will add time on to one of these days. As we add a CIP 12 that will add time on to one of these days. As we see a CIP 003 version 7, we will modify, update the course, and include that as well. So the standards environment is a very dynamic space. We'll be spending 2-3 updates of the course every time, every year rolls through as the standards continue to change. The certification will have individual items and questions modified to reflect current state. And all of our students go through and they're invited to participate in a community forum that we operate. And within that forum, there's an alumni section. So students who've been through ICS 456, they will have special access to an alumni section where we provide those components and those elements of new updated material in regards to standards changes so that they can maintain currency. So similar to a university and a fellows program where you can come back, take courses that you've taken in the past with new updated information, we provide for alumni new kind of module slides in regards to standards additions or modifications or changes, as well as outside of the alumni component to the overall forum. About 4,000 plus members currently. That ongoing industrial control system, cybersecurity specific talks, and topic areas being addressed every day, all the time in that forum. As people who are joined this call, you should have all received a forum invitation. And depending on how much time we have at the end of this webcast, if there's any questions that we haven't answered in this webcast, we will immediately open up a discussion thread in the forum, and you can join us there, ask your questions there. Ted Gutierrez, co-author of ICS 456, is capturing questions in this forum, and he'll be reflecting them there as well. So anybody going to the forum over time can see those same questions. So for individuals coming through this 5-day course, the unicorns that we're creating, they had wonderful things to say about the course. Here's some examples of some of those items. On our page, you can see which utilities they were actually with. I didn't want to highlight anybody's names or company here, but it is available on the page if you'd like to see it for the ICS 456 course. Ultimately, the reason I put this here is in regards to people who come to the class, it is generally a common message, one side or the other. The common message of, I'm a compliance person, and I didn't know if this was going to be the right class for me. I saw the hands-on lab elements. I don't normally do kind of technical work, but tremendous amount of value in regards to learning what challenges and what implementation practices the people on the other side of the house are faced with on a daily basis. And then on the other end, the technical people. Hey, I know who SANS is. I've taken a number of SANS courses, and I looked to this course and I thought it was going to be nothing but compliance, 5 days of compliance, 5 days of regulation, and I wasn't sure if it was the right class for me. But coming in and understanding how the way I do my job and how to align it better with what is required, and understanding the reasoning and operational guidance behind why we're doing things certain ways, was absolutely eye-opening, and understanding what the other parts of our technical teams are working on, so that the system people or the network people, somebody that's beyond your role. Generally, we've gotten just amazing feedback from everybody. I have the opportunity to review all of the evals and all of the feedback elements at the end of every day, at the end of every class. And it's just been a very exciting kind of course to go out and teach the industry. I think one of the main things we generally get is this class should have existed 10, 12 years ago. And going back to my days working for the utilities, I wish it did as well. To have the ability from a hiring manager perspective to go and look for people that have been through this course or hold and maintain the certification definitely would have made my hiring practices a little bit simpler to at least get down to the right types of individuals. From an individual perspective, coming into the electric utility sector, having the ability to go to a course like this and understand the information technology components, operational technology components, and how the electric system operates would have been a significant benefit for new hires coming in. And individuals, just going through their learning plan, looking for areas that they can expand. Certainly, this is working in an area of NERC-CIP, you'll be exposed to parts of your organization that if you were doing traditional IT or traditional instrumentation control work, you would likely be in that role, exposed to your peers, certainly, but maybe not the rest of the organization. Doing work in a SIP role, you will absolutely be doing work with HR, with legal, with contractors, with vendors, with other peers on how things work together from a system and from a networking perspective and an operational perspective, working with various components of your operating environment. Truly a unique experience from a career perspective. So the types of individuals we're talking about within the organization, is this the right class for you? Generally speaking, the answer is yes. So if you're working for an electric utility or for a vendor, for a contractor, somebody who's an integrator, somebody who supports customer base that has NERC-CIP specific implementations, if you're an IT or an OT cybersecurity, field support personnel, if you're in cybersecurity, physical security operation, if you're in a compliance staff or compliance role, team leads, governance, auditors, all the above. If somewhere in your job duties you are doing SIP-related work, this course is the right course for you. As I kind of showed the Firehose across the 5 days, I wanted to show it in a different format, so these definitely aren't in order. It's in alphabetic order. These are the objectives from the certification and from the exam. So this is publicly available. You can go to the GCIP website and look at the 13 certification objectives that list. What I wanted to demonstrate is just how these are tightly aligned with what we cover in the course, and they're tightly aligned with the standards and the education training elements there. So BES Cyber System Categorization, that certification objectives with the elements displayed underneath it, for the functional model, the BES Reliability Operating Services, Attachment 1 criteria, asset identification, those elements absolutely aligned with CIP 002. Going down, configuration change management and vulnerability assessments. So knowledge of the change management process, configuration monitoring, your requirements around vulnerability assessment and performance, transient cyber asset removable media, all tightly aligned with CIP 10. Electronic security perimeters. So moving into network elements around electronic access points, external routable connectivity, dial-up requirements, malicious communication detection at the network level, intermediate systems, jump host environments, moving into interactive remote access, multi-factor authentication, ingress, egress access rules, firewall monitoring, firewall management, all tightly aligned with CIP 005. Incident reporting and response planning. So the latest NOPR from FERC in regards to expanding out what should be required from a mandatory or reportable cybersecurity incident perspective, looking at what's currently required as a cybersecurity incident versus a reportable cybersecurity incident, looking at the capabilities of what you're able to identify, what you're able to detect, and looking how you would classify that, how you would contain it, eradicate it, recover from it, the lessons learned process that you would perform. All of these elements that we walk through in our learning objectives tied with CIP 008 and the associated certification objectives of the exam. Information protection, CIP 11, the wide range of NERC-specific defined terms that truly we have to get that foundation and that set in place on day one to allow us to continue to move forward with all the rest of the standards. So everybody's learning a new language, kind of that Rosetta Stone image that I showed earlier in the slides, knowing the terms that are used throughout the NERC-CIP standards, knowing how they apply, knowing what those terms mean, the types of assets that are associated with them, the types of job tasks that are associated, and the responsibilities of the people who perform them. The glossary elements, definitely a component of the certification objectives. CIP 004 on the personnel and training requirements. And moving into CIP 006, I didn't specifically identify CIP 14 here. We cover it in the course, but the majority of the certification objectives on the exam, if they're physical security in nature, would be focused on CIP 6, not CIP 14. Recovery plans for BES Cyber Systems, CIP 009. Security management controls, focused more on CIP 003. The standards development component, the timelines for preparing for an audit, the components behind the compliance monitoring enforcement program, the request for interpretations process, urgent action requests, VRFs versus VSLs. Those elements are all contained within this process. Standards development certification objective covered in the course on day 5. The enforcement element, kind of the process from audit and moving down that path, and ultimately into system security management on CIP 007. Those 13 items are the certification objectives, all available on the website for GCIP, which I'll show at the end here. And kind of, again, just as a review, those items that we walked through and where they align with the course objectives specifically within ICS 456. From the how perspective, so how was this created? As we walked through kind of the need for this course, and again, a lot of the feedback has been we needed this course a long time ago, but definitely it struck us with the significant paradigm shift from CIP version 1, 2, and 3 into CIP version 5, 6, and beyond. The time has come that the course that should have existed a long time ago, the same struggles that started many, many years ago with the 1200 standards and the 1300 standards, expanding out to field assets and the original CIP version 1 set of standards. The struggles that existed then in regards to what does this language mean and what are we supposed to do, and the time when many asset owners and operators were going to the regions and saying, just tell us what to do. We want to comply. We are a mission-focused organization. We absolutely want to ensure the reliability of the electric system, but we have confusion around what we're required to do. We have confusion around what you're recommending we do. We have confusion around what does good look like. If we wanted to go beyond the standards, what kinds of tools are out there? What kinds of systems are out there? The time has come for some level of focus training, as now that it's that whole question and confusion component is all around the industry with version 5 and version 6, and many other countries that are looking to, we want some level of cybersecurity regulation for our critical infrastructure, but we don't want to go through the decades-long process that is NERC-CIP. We want to get to where you are now. As they look to other standards frameworks, as they look to IEC 62443, or they look to NIST, or they look to the cybersecurity framework, they look at those as things that they can do, but they look to NERC-CIP as something that is being done. It's actually been implemented. It's a practical set of standards for electric utility infrastructure, so they know it's achievable. So they want to get to that as fast as possible. So we often have a series of students from abroad, either because they're supporting North American utilities or because their country is focused on achieving something like NERC-CIP as fast as possible. So with that demand and that backdrop, we focused on creating ICS 456. From that point, after the course existed for a little over a year, we started going down the path of having a credential tied to it, which is the GCIP, the GIAC Critical Infrastructure Protection Certification. We held a pre-beta period that was just from the perspective of known trusted parties throughout our ecosystem, people that we've worked with for many, many years, that we are very confident in their knowledge of NERC-CIP. We're confident in their knowledge of how it's applied, confident in their knowledge of being able to go and build and be a mentor for somebody who is trying to learn in this space. And we asked them to take the exam, give us their feedback, and we made corrections based on this pre-beta period. Then we opened it up to ICS 456 beta alumni. So this was very specific in an exam development process where people who have taken the class have the sets of books, they have the knowledge, they've been through the 5-day class in assessing how those individuals perform on the exam. Now we're in an analysis window where the beta has closed. We're looking at performing analysis of all of the questions, which questions performed well, which questions performed poorly, looking at the importance and criticality and frequency of each kind of item to say, how important is this from a knowledge area perspective for somebody who's going to go back to their job and perform these tasks. We're performing question edits, and then we're determining a passing score. After that, it's the final step where we go into this exam going live on, I've heard 2 different dates, and it's on a weekend, so it's probably not at huge importance, but I've heard February 24th, and I've heard February 25th. The most current that I heard was February 24th, so that's what I'm rolling with here. But that is a Saturday and a Sunday, so likely not of great importance. But February 26th, absolutely. If it is something that you are interested in pursuing, it will be ready and available for you to pursue. And ultimately, the call is just like the call was for the electric system operators, and it's for the industry to adopt. It's for the industry to say, this is important. It matters that the people who can directly impact and influence our nation's critical infrastructure should probably have a license or a credential and some continuing education hours similar to what we would ask of the people who cut our hair, or something beyond that, up to the level of what we look at for our NERC certified system operators. The elements here, so Ted Gutierrez, co-author of the course, a member of the ICS team, looking at the GCIP certification to help validate professionals who access, support, and maintain the critical systems that keep the grid running, ensuring that they have an understanding of the regulatory requirements of NERC-CIP, as well as the practical implementation strategies to achieve both regulatory compliance and its cybersecurity objectives. So that's another way of saying that cybersecurity and NERC-CIP is part of a company's safety program. Cybersecurity and NERC-CIP is a part of ensuring that you can manage and maintain and ensure a reliable electric system. It is a part of your commitment to your ratepayers, your taxpayers, your investors, to manage and maintain a system in an affordable way. So it's completely aligned with your organization's ultimate goals going back hundreds of years to provide safe, reliable, and affordable power. Just understanding the cybersecurity element and the digital asset element that contributes to all of those mission objectives. The general questions we typically get in regards to the test, currently a 75 question exam, it is open book. So for those who are going through the 456 course, you receive 7 books that we cover in 5 days. It is quite a massive amount of material. It is a 3-hour exam. The scheduling components, if you schedule for the exam, you receive 2 practice tests that you can walk through. So you can imagine we have a large question bank of questions that cover these 13 certification objectives. So in practice test 1 and in practice test 2, you will generally get different questions with maybe some small overlap. And then in your actual exam, the same thing would hold true. You would get some overlapping questions, but questions would, in your practice exam, would absolutely lead you towards the look and feel and the experience of the exam itself. The 2 elements I have up here as asterisks, those only are asterisks until February 24th. Generally, somebody going through an ICS 456 class, they're allowed to take the exam 7 to 10 days after the class completes. For those who are SIP fountains of knowledge and SIP experts, you've worked in this space for a very long period of time. You absolutely have the ability to directly challenge this exam. You do not need to go through ICS 456 to be eligible for this test. So starting on February 24th or 25th, you would be able to go to a Pearson VUE testing center, register for the GCIP, and schedule your exam. From the point that you pay for it, you have up to 120 days to complete it and take it. On a maintenance side, so the continuing education element, you have to renew the certification every 4 years. You can either do that by really challenging yourself and going in and retaking the exam straight up, or you could demonstrate that you've maintained 36 hours of continuing education in order to maintain the exam. So those are the certification summary items. From a ultimate goal, we are looking at creating the cyber operators that have the ultimately responsible for ensuring the reliability of the grid and supporting the electric system operators. If you think of all the tools and technology that the electric system operators rely on, they are absolutely relying on our cyber operators to do their job effectively, communicate well, and understand the operational cybersecurity, IT, and OT environments. An absolute diverse skill set. Information on the course itself is available at sans.org/ICS456. Information on the cert is available at GIAC.org/GCIP. Those two sites, one for the course and one for the cert. And then specifically, if you're interested in the course, you can pick which Mickey Mouse you want. The next two runs, one on the West Coast in February, and then in Anaheim, and the next at the ICS Security Summit on the East Coast down in Florida. Those are the next two runs that are coming up that are public runs. If anyone is interested in a private run, kind of having your whole organization team going through it at once, having the specific conversations around your policies, your procedures, your implementation strategy, your interpretations, definitely shoot me an email at tconway@sans.org if you are interested in something other than the public runs that are on the website. I had mentioned previously, we'll still have about 5 minutes for questions here, but if we don't get to your question or you would rather just ask your question in the forum, please join us at the forum. That is this website that's displayed here, ics-community.sans.org. Ted Gutierrez is standing by. Anybody who's received the invites that would like to join us there, he'll be approving your access. And there's a discussion thread that is up and active in regards to the GCIP certification webcast. So with that, I will pause for a second and look to see if we have questions that have come through. And if we don't, I will migrate my way over to the forum to answer any questions that may have come through in that area. Okay, I see a whole bunch of questions. Okay, so let me try to go through some of these and see if there's any common theme that I could respond to multiple and once in the final minutes we have here. So there's a question specific to CIP 004 access control requirements, R4 and R5. So the authorization reviews and the access privilege reviews, are they grouped in day 2? They are not. They are in day 4, where all of the CIP 004 requirements are addressed. We did think about that from the perspective of a instructor going through and putting them where you would be performing that task. So based on job role, so somebody who is responsible for CIP 005, for example, maybe they have job duties that are focused on, they do the access grants and the access removes for interactive remote access and people coming through an intermediate system. We could put some of those requirements from CIP 004 there, but then in CIP 007, there's people that have the individual user accounts and the changes to the default and shared accounts. We would have started to create kind of the spaghetti requirement confusion that existed in earlier versions of CIP with CIP version 1, 2, and 3 that was confusing for the industry, and it was removed. So we wanted to take advantage of that benefit and teach them in the way that they're structured now with CIP 004, all on day 4. So I hope that answers that question. Let's see. So there's a question as well in regards to just the right tools and the right audience. Definitely, this is a 400 level class, but from my exposure within SANS, I would tell you it's a much more technical 400 level class because we cover all of the domains and we do a number of hands-on labs in each topic area of each domain. So from a network perspective, from a system administration perspective, from a change management, and from a each of the individual standards on access control, vulnerability assessments, the number of hands-on labs is pretty extensive. probably beyond where a traditional 400 level class would go. So I do believe technical folks that are purely technical, they will enjoy the hands-on element components and the benefit of understanding what they're required to do come audit and demonstration time. Let's see. Are there prerequisite courses? So this is an interesting question. So we've had some talk to us about going through, what if I don't know what a control system is? What if I'm brand new to the utility space and I don't know how the electric system operates? We generally understand that there's a number of people that kind of get one bullet in the gun. They understand that they're going to get sent to one training course, or a company is going to do one private for the year. It's going to be in their training development plan, their personnel development plan. And when I'm teaching, I consider that that entire week, morning to night, I am accessible to the student. So when we generally, if we have a couple of students in a class that they have those concerns, that I've never been exposed to control systems. I don't know why it's difficult to patch, why it's difficult to do user account hardening, why it's difficult to do monitoring, why these requirements are so difficult in these field or facility environments. We'll go to whiteboards, we'll go to some additional slides, and we'll spend time in mornings or evenings to kind of add that additional knowledge. We'll do the same for electric system operations. We will try to fill the gap that is in the room for individual student needs, so that we don't have to have a set, you must take this class first type of requirement. There are a number of additional questions, so we will absolutely be going to the ICS community. If your question did not get asked, I would direct you to go to that site. Again, that the beauty of that page is it's not a mail list. It's not something that you have to participate in immediately. You can join when you have time. If you have something else to run off to now, you can go back and look at this discussion thread in that community forum whenever your schedule allows. But Ted has captured the questions we have here, and the answers that I've given for the ones that I've already addressed, and I'll direct myself over to the forum to address anything else that remains and anything else that comes in while we're there. I'd like to thank everybody for joining, and I'll turn it back over to Carol. Maybe. Carol, are you muted?
Yeah, I'm here. Thank you so much, Tim, for your great presentation, which helps bring this content to the SANS community. To our audience, we greatly appreciate you listening in. For a schedule of all upcoming and archived SANS webcasts, including this one, please visit sans.org/webcast. Until next time, take care, and we hope to have you back again for the next SANS webcast.